Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to Buckeye Politics. It's me, your favorite Ohioan. Today, we're going to be looking at how both the Republicans and Democrats have been doing when it comes to money, how much they have, how much cash they have on hand, how much they've gotten from PACs and individuals, and comparing those numbers to previous elections to kind of get a good gauge about how each party is doing financially. So, currently, in terms of the U.S. House in 2022, Democrats have raised about $581 million to the Republicans' $565 million. So Democrats lead Republicans in the U.S. House in terms of money raised by about $20 million. That said, when it comes to total spent, Republicans have actually spent more money. Republicans have spent $404 million compared to Democrats' $352 million. Despite that, Democrats have much more cash on hand, with $532 million still on hand, while Republicans only have $263 million still on hand. And if you look at the amount from PACs, Democrats have gotten $120 million from PACs, and Republicans have gotten $106 million from PACs, while Democrats have gotten $414 million from individual donators. And Republicans have gotten about $370 million from individuals. So obviously, as you can see here, Democrats are certainly outspending the Republicans. They're certainly getting more money than Republicans. But when you compare it to previous elections, they're actually doing pretty poorly when it comes to fundraising. Let's go with the House back in 2020. So back in the 2020 House elections, Democrats raised in total about $898 million to Republicans $762 million. Currently, Democrats have only in 2022, Democrats have outraised Republicans by about $20 million. Back in 2020, they outraised Republicans by about $150 million. So Democrats currently have only raised about $20 million more than the Republicans, while back in 2020, they raised more than $150 million more than the GOP. They also spent way more, pretty much all of it, or Republicans, didn't spend a whole lot. That said, Democrats still had plenty on hand, and they also got a bunch more from PACs. Currently, if you look at the amount of money they've gotten from PACs, it's pretty even. And meanwhile, individuals is also pretty even as well. When back in 2020, Democrats got a lot more money from individuals. Back in 2020, Democrats got about $100 million more dollars from individuals than Republicans did. Meanwhile, in 2022, Republicans are really only down by about 40 to 50 million. So Republicans have basically cut the Democrats' lead in terms of fundraising in half in the House. And if we go down to look at the U.S. Senate, we see a very similar story. Currently in the U.S. Senate, Democrats have raised $399 million to the Republicans' $273 million. Democrats have spent about $250 million to the Republicans' $178 million. Republicans have $145 million on hand. The Democrats have $187 million on hand. The Republicans have gotten more money from PACs in the Senate, with $26 million coming from PACs, compared to the Democrats' $23 million. Meanwhile, Democrats have outraised Republicans pretty well when it comes to money from individuals, with Democrats getting $356 million in money from individuals to the Republicans' $205 million from individuals. So the Senate kind of looks a little bit better for the Democrats, but even compared to 2020, it is really not that strong of a performance. If we look back in 2020, we come out here at the U.S. Senate, Democrats outraised Republicans by about $300 million in the U.S. Senate back in 2020. Currently, they've only outraised us by about $150 million. So once again, Republicans have cut the amount of money the Democrats raised in half. We look at the money from individuals. Democrats outraged Republicans by about $300 million when it came to money from individuals. We look back at the by 2022, and Democrats have only outraged Republicans by about $150 million. So in both the Senate and the House, when you compare 2020 to 2022, Republicans have cut the amount of money Democrats have raised in half, which tells me that either A, Republicans are donating much more, or B, Democrats aren't donating as much, or they aren't raising as much, however you want to put it. And so because of that, when you look at financial standing, Republicans, in terms of the amount of money they have on hand, they're actually doing pretty well compared to previous elections. That said, the Republicans are not using their money. If you come down here and look at the most competitive races, these are the most competitive races of the cycle. Let's start in the state of Nevada. Currently in the state of Nevada, Adam Laxalt has only raised about $7 million to Catherine Cortez Masto, the Democrat incumbent's $29 million. So Catherine Cortez Masto has outraised Adam Laxalt by about $23 million. We come over here, let's look at Arizona. This is a pretty big one. Arizona. In the Arizona Senate race, Mark Kelly, the incumbent Democrat, has raised $52 million. Blake Masters, meanwhile, has only gotten $4 million. And a lot of that, he is a pretty self-funded guy, so a lot of this money is pretty much self-funding his campaign, because he is a very wealthy dude. But that said, $4 million compared to what we have, I think, like $200 million on hand or something crazy like that, according to that thing we just saw. So, like I said, the Republicans have plenty of money, they're just not spending it. come over here and look at Wisconsin. This is one of the few races that Republicans are doing very well in, and this is why I think Wisconsin's going to be a solid victory. Because if you look across the country, Democrats are pretty much outspending Republicans or outraising Republicans pretty much everywhere. But in Wisconsin, Ron Johnson is absolutely destroying Mandela Barnes. Ron Johnson, the incumbent Republican senator, has raised $17 million to Mandela Barnes $6 million. So Republicans are doing very well in Wisconsin. I think that state is probably pretty much shored up based on fundraising. If you look at the Ohio Senate race, my great home state, Tim Ryan has raised about $21 million to J.D. Vance's $3 million. This was before Mitch McConnell threw in the $28 million or whatever, so I'm sure in a few days this will probably update, and probably Vance this will pretty much be even because, with the money spent by McConnell's super PAC to prop up Vance, so I'm sure that this race will even up a little bit. But even as of now, Tim Ryan is still outraising J.D. Vance by about, let's see, $18 million. We come up here and look at the Ohio's 9th district, where we have Marcy Kaptur, a very vulnerable incumbent Democrat, taking on J.R. Majewski. And Marcy Kaptur has raised almost $2 million to J.R. Majewski's $500,000, so Majewski's getting pretty outspent. Go up here and look at Ohio's 1st. This is the reason I think Steve Chabot is going to win re-election. Steve Chabot, if you didn't know, he's the incumbent Republican representative in Cincinnati. It's a traditionally suburban, moderate Republican district, but it traditionally, and more recently, I should say, it has trended very heavily to the left. That said, Steve Chabot, the incumbent Republican, has outraised his Democratic opponent, and he's just a pretty popular guy, so I think he's going to win re-election there. Let's look at Georgia, though. Herschel Walker. Herschel Walker is actually doing pretty well compared to the other candidates. Raphael Warnock, the incumbent Democrat, has raised $60 million to Herschel Walker's $20 million. Republicans have actually put a decent amount of money into this race, though, so that's probably why Walker's doing a little bit better when it comes to fundraising, but still not great. I mean, we can still spend more there. We have what? We have a bunch of money in the bank still. Let's look at Pennsylvania, Dr. Mehmet Oz. So currently in the Pennsylvania Senate race, John Fetterman, incumbent Democrat, has only raised $25 million to Dr. Mehmet Oz's $18 million. A lot of this is from the Republican PACs have been giving money to Oz. But this is the reason I think that John Fetterman is probably in a worse position than the polls have him in, is that he is barely outraising Oz. He's only at $25 million. John Fetterman is running an incredible campaign online. He's getting a lot of dollars in from people across the country. But Oz is only a little bit behind him, so that's just an interesting thing to look at. And John Fetterman probably isn't on as stable ground as we once thought he was. I'm not sure what other competitive races really are there. Unfortunately, the site does not give the information for governor races, so I'm not really sure what to think of that there. And you look at New Hampshire, they don't have in New Hampshire they don't have the Senate race, so we can't really check that. Let's see, what can we look at? Let's look at Florida. Let's see how Marco Rubio is doing. So in Florida, Val Demings is still outraising Marco Rubio. Val Demings has raised about $47 million to Marco Rubio's $36 million. So Rubio is being outraised, but it's not going to matter. He's popular enough. And so let's go back and look at the stats at a glance. So let's go back to the Senate. As we saw, and as we literally just saw, Republicans are being outspent by Democrats. Democrats are spending a lot of money in places like Arizona, Ohio, Georgia, Nevada. And meanwhile, Republicans still have plenty of money on hand. Republicans have $250 million on hand. That Democrats do also have a lot of money on hand as well. But as we saw back when we looked at 2020, let's go do that right now, actually. Look at 2020. So back in 2020, the Democrats had about $258 million on hand after the election. They have about that on hand right now. So Democrats are pretty much, right now they have $299 million on hand. So traditionally, when you look at the past elections, Democrats have usually had about $300 million left on hand. So Democrats are pretty much maxed out when it comes to spending. I mean, they might spend a little bit more here and there, but really the amount they're spending now is probably going to continue, unless they make a bunch of money for the foreseeable future. Meanwhile, Republicans have $253 million in the bank. So Republicans, it's not like we're struggling to fundraise. As we saw compared to previous elections, Republicans are actually doing very well when it comes to raising money. It's just we're not spending it, and when we are, we're spending it in dumb races like Ohio, giving J.D. Vance $28 million, or Wisconsin giving Ron Johnson money when he's already outperforming Mandela Barnes by like $10 million. So when we look at the amount of money spent in this election, it really is just going to come down to how Republicans use it. Republicans, for once, in terms of recent elections, actually are doing pretty well in terms of money raised and fundraising. It's just they're not spending the money effectively, and that could come back and cost them. So with that, I want to thank you for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like and subscribe for more.